Hi, this is Dr. Mark Stevenson and we're back with Welcome to Wing Chun session 14. I want to talk a little bit about, this is a little bit of theory first of all, but then we'll give you some examples about what sort of mobility and flexibility requirements that we need for doing Wing Chun. So as we mentioned before, Wing Chun is split, so about 80% of it is in the techniques that are done with the hands, right? And about 20% on average, you know, throughout your program, you might spend more on a particular class doing kicking, right, is the legs. So given that, we don't, it's not like when we start, if you started doing karate, which I've done before, or like a Shaolin type program, or Taekwondo, where it's like, day one, right, we need to be stretching like maniacs, okay? Because, you know, they spend a much harder proportion kicking, and on top of that, they do high kicks, which we don't really do. There are a few, depending on the school, but the classical view of it, and what I was taught by most of my teachers, is that you know, most kicking is to the waist or lower. Okay. Sometimes we do kicking in training, which, you know, some sort of Shaolin-derived training kicks, which are designed to open up the hips and train you with some strength, but they're not really considered practical kicks. Yeah. So for that reason, we don't have huge flexibility and mobility demands. We do need to have healthy and mobile shoulders, okay? And some people really struggle with this as well. So especially that there's a lot of punching, and when you get on and start doing luksao and rolling as well, there's a lot of work is done in the shoulder joint, okay? So I really recommend having a good shoulder mobility and flexibility sort of prehab routine, which I do with all my clients and people that work with me, because for Wing Chun in particular, it's a high use area, so you've got to take care of it and you've got to build up the strength and the mobility there. So that's a kind of a key. And then the next one is that sometimes people, if you're very, very detrained, it's your first type of exercise that you've done, they'll have really, really tight hamstrings, lower back issues potentially as well. So even to get to be able to do, you know, sort of waist-high kicks where you can just kick the leg out and, you know, sort of hold it there, is tricky for some people, right? So they need to build up some strength, but also mobility and flexibility as well, especially in and around the hips and hamstrings. Other than that, I would say you want to be able to bend and arch your spine in a natural way in Wing Chun. So especially as you get more advanced, like at the beginning, it's very static, right? And we keep everything neutral. But later on, you've got movements where you're springing and compressing a little bit more, right? So to get to that point healthily and naturally, it's good to have some movements where you're sort of opening and closing the spine, so some sort of spinal stretches as well. And that would really be the core set of things that I would say. Yeah, and then also, if you're training really hard, sometimes people can develop tension in the lower back as well, so it's good to open up and stretch that out as well, especially if you're, you know, training like a maniac. And training, you know, multiple times a day or anything like that, right? So, you know, human bodies get worn and get beaten up by training, even if we're doing nice, carefully considered internal training. So we also need to take steps to stretch and open up those areas that are in sort of high use. So that's it really. So flexibility and mobility, it doesn't give you any sort of magic powers. It's mostly about injury prevention and giving you the minimum mobility requirements to do the activity that you're doing, right? So spending huge amounts of time focusing on it, I think for Wing Chun is not a great idea, but it is an important thing that you need to be doing, right? So with that in mind, let's have a look at some basic stretches that you can do to prepare yourself for practice or to stretch out afterwards. Now there's two main types of stretches. On one side you have rotational stretches, so something where you're like, you know, like a shoulder roll, right? So this is a really classic example of a rotational stretch, where you're just trying to comfortably and smoothly move through your full range of motion, right? And what you're doing there, opening up the joint, preparing it to move through its full range of motion, and lubricating the joint as well, making sure there's plenty of blood and fluids moving in it and doesn't feel all tight and beaten up, so you can get on and start doing the activity. And these are really good, these sort of dynamic stretches, these are really good at the start of a session. And then you also have static stretches, and sort of I'd say the classic one here would be some form of toe touch. So where you're going to just bend forward, get to the point where you feel some tightness, and then just hold, right? And you hold it for 10 seconds, or people like to count breaths as well, so you can count for 10 breaths or so. And you're just relaxing in that position, and then every time you feel like you can lengthen a little bit, you're just opening it up, stretching a little bit more, and then when you're done, you just unroll out that position, right? So they're static stretches, and then the aim there is to lengthen the soft tissues, right? So don't bounce up and down. And I would say initially, don't do anything fancy like what's called PNF stretching, where you're going to stretch, counter stretch, or tighten muscles when they're under tension. Don't worry about that. Just go to the point where you have some restriction, some tightness, and then just try and relax as much as possible. What I like is every time I breathe out, so breathe in through the nose and breathe out through the mouth. Every time I breathe out, I just feel like that tissue is just lengthening and extending a little bit, right? So every time I breathe out, stretch a little bit more, yeah? But don't bounce up and down, okay? Good. So, 2 types of stretches, dynamic stretches and static stretches, and we'll put them together in a sort of routine that you could use at the beginning of your session, and then I would recommend the longer static stretches, so picking 1 or 2 of those to do at the end of the session once you're fully warmed up, and fully got blood flowing across all the muscles. And then if you really want to work on flexibility, those ones you can sit into for a longer period of time, right? So that sort of 10 breaths, slow one, sort of just that's to open up and lengthen tissues to begin practice. But if you're really you need to sort of get to higher levels of flexibility, then I would recommend spending some dedicated time at the end of your session to sit in for a longer period of time, 1-2 minutes ideally, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes in one stretch to really get those tissues to open up. And that can be challenging for people. So if you can't make it that long and it feels really, really tight, just back off, relax, and do it kind of sets and rep style. Do 30 seconds, sit into it. Oh, too tight, come up again, relax, shake off, do a rotational stretch, and then go back into the stretch for another 30 seconds. Repeat 2 or 3 times, right? Good. Okay, so let's just look at a little basic routine that we can do. So we'll start off with 1 rotational stretch for the neck, which would be a half circle, which is quite good and gentle for most people. Some people, when they have alignment problems in the upper neck, the cervical vertebrae, so when they roll backwards, they're not moving the whole neck like this, they're just like this, right? So you can put a lot of tension there. So I recommend for a beginner, just this half roll. So it's like ear to shoulder, roll down, ear to shoulder. Yeah? And it's a rotational stretch, so you're just letting it softly move through that range of motion. Yeah? Not trying to force anything, everything relaxed. Let the joints move as they want to. If you have any clicking or popping, that's fine. But if you have any pain, you don't want to be doing these stretches, right? So you want to be moving with whatever you can move comfortably without pain, but potentially with some tension, right? So that's an idea of a rotational stretch for the neck. You could do 8, 9, 10, 20 of those, right? And then we can have a look at a static stretch to the neck, which might be a head turn, right? So you're just going to turn your head as much as you can, keeping the rest of your body stiff and straight. And you're going to feel the tension through the side of the neck here. And you're going to go to the range of motion, just squeeze in that position, and hold, and back to center, right? And then you can do the other side. And just hold for 10 seconds or more. Really go to the end of the range of motion, twist, and back to center, right? So that's a static and a rotational stretch for the neck, right? Shoulders, we've got shoulder rolls that we talked about earlier. So we'll do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and back the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And now we're going to do a static stretch for the shoulders, and all the way along the forearm. So I'm going to call what's called the Egyptian. So hands out, both palms facing forward, feel like you're stretching all the way to the fingertips, and then one hand rotates this way, and one hand rotates the other way. And so you've got a spiraling, twisting stretch all the way through from one fingertip to the other. Then let that roll out and then twist the other way. Try and keep the shoulders down. Hold for about 10 seconds or so, and the other way. Some people feel this in the bicep, some feel it in the forearm, some people feel it in the shoulder joint. So just, wherever you feel the stretch. Good, all right? So, and that's a rotational stretch there for the shoulders. So let's look at the rotator cuffs. So the rotator cuffs take an absolute beating if you're doing loads and loads of Luxao, especially if you've got partners that are very aggressive and giving you a lot of force, or you're carrying a lot of tension in the chest. So it's a really important exercise to warm up and to take care of. So what I like is these shoulder rotations here. So this one, you're just going to hold in this position to start off with, shoulders down, and then rotate upwards. Keep those shoulders down. Down, and then rotate downwards. And again, when you're caving in like this, right? So keep the chest up, feel like it's the rotator cuff which is driving the movement. Up to center, hold there for a second, and then up. 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. Good. And then there's a rotational stretch for the rotator cuffs, which I really like as well, which is small shoulder rolls, but driving them from the rotator cuff. So a lot of people, they'll do it like this, right? And that's out there in the shoulder joint. Instead, I want you to feel like it's your rotator cuff which is moving the shoulder forward. So you get this kind of like slight hunch roll, and the hands going slightly wider, fatter circles out at the end. But you can really feel it here, warming up the rotator cuff. And you can go forward, or you can go back, and you can go one forward, one back, and one forward, one back the other way. Yeah? It looks a bit dorky, but I can really feel that works really well. I really like that as a prehab exercise for Luxao. So just getting all the blood into the rotator cuff there. Good. Next one to think about. So let's do some ones where we're going to do the side, right, of the abdomen, okay? So easiest one here to do is just side bends. So hands go down the side, and you're just going to gently lean down and keep the other one up on the side of the hip. And just go to the point where you feel some tension going through the side. And just hold in that position, come back to center, and back down the other side. Yeah. Breathing is really important with abdominal stretches because your abdominal muscles are involved in your breathing. So when you breathe out, you'll often find you can go deeper into these stretches. Good, and back up to center. And a rotational stretch, we'll just do one for the hips now, so which is classic hip rolls, right? With these ones, really just try and make sure you're going through the full range of motion, because I see people just doing this, right? Okay, that's not your full range of motion for your hip, right? So your hip moves in all sorts of interesting ways, right? So as I'm doing this, I'm like popping the hip all the way around forward, stick the butt out of the back and go all the way around, right? And that way I'm really feeling the movement inside the hip joint. Good, change other direction. And that's the aim for these rotational stretches. Maximum possible mobility within your current range of motion. Getting everything nice and warmed up, mobile, with blood and fluids in the tissues. Good. Okay, let's have a look at some of the ones for the lower body. Okay, so classic static stretch would be the toe touch. Okay, so feet shoulder width apart, and you can turn them out a little bit or feel like you're rotating into the hips. It doesn't need to be super strict, so you don't need to be like have additional tension. You can even bend the knees a little bit. The main feeling is that you've got that stretch coming through the lower back and also through here. Yeah. So again, turn that out. You can keep a little bit of flexibility in there, because I'd rather that you went deeper into the stretch rather than tense up, tighten up here, and then feel like you can't go anywhere, when actually you can probably go further if you just let that off a little bit. Let the head relax, everything come down. Good, and bend the knees and come up together. Yeah? It's just a nice way to get out of that stretch without putting too much tension through the lower back, right? Doing a good morning on the way up. Good. All right, so let's have a look at some other static stretches for the legs. So this is a classic one. This does all sorts. So this is the sort of the side hurdler side stretch, standing side squat stretch. So what you're going to do is just come down onto one side, grab hold of the ankle. I find the easiest way to do this to start off with. So people get that feeling that rather than the heel coming up, you're pushing your weight down through the heel and then opening up through the middle, what we call the yin meridians on the inside of the legs, and just opening up that tissue area there. Hips as well, and the ankles get a really good stretch in this posture. Good, change other side. Good. Yeah, really good for the hips, ankles, and hamstrings, this one. Just brilliant, brilliant kung fu stretch. Good. And then the next standing one that I really recommend, we won't do the floor ones today, we'll just do a few standing hip and lower body mobility stretches. It's just the classic squat stretch. So basically you're going to drop down into the bottom position of the squat. So go down to a position where your hips are wide enough and you can get your heels down on the ground, and then put your hands in between the legs, or you can sit up like this. Some people like this one. So it's depending on how you're built, this can mean when you're carrying some more weight out in front, that can help you get more vertical, right? The most important thing is that you're not like this, right? You're not up on the toes, right? You're trying to drive your weight down through the heels. And then back nice and straight, as much as you can. Sit into that posture. Feel like like I said before, you can drive the hips apart, knees apart. That's really nice, just to deepen that stretch through the hips. And then when you're ready, up we come. Yeah. Let's just look at one more rotational stretch for the lower body, and then we'll finish off, which is a really good, after you've done some of that static stretching, is a really nice one. It's just feet together, and then you're just going to do small circles and little squats with the feet and knees together. And this one does the ankles and knees. So it's a rotational stretch for the ankle and knee joints, just putting them through some of those slightly compromised range of motion, building a little bit of strength and mobility in that range. Change other way. So I find this really good. A very good sort of pre-habby type drill, just to get your body used to the fact that it might end up in some of these non-ideal postures, and build a little bit of resilience to getting into those. Good. Excellent. So from the top going down, and then a little bit of movement just to wake off, and then at the end you can often do like a whole body shake as well, just to get everything loose and ready to train. So that is an example of a very short opening up sort of initial prehab mobility routine that you can do before you start training. So brief warm up, do some strength, basic calisthenic exercises, and then you can just jump straight into this, do this routine, and now you're ready to get on with your training. Good. Feet together, right fist, left palm. Practice, practice. See you all next time.